Hello. One of the points of doing this channel was to try and see what it's like to express your thoughts online and see what the feedback is on that. On the 5th of June, I had a very interesting conversation with my friend Peter and my friend Aaron. Aaron expressed some views which certainly go against the mainstream, and that is one of the things I value about him. As an individual, he is very creative and also very free thinking. I've ummed and ahed whether or not we could actually publish this video, but have decided to go ahead with it. I'm not a zealot. I'm not going to destroy videos because I don't believe in what was said in them. I've invited him to have an open and honest conversation. I think it's very clear that from Peter and I's nervous laughter, we disagree with him, but it is undoubtedly his right to say this. And interestingly enough, after the video I did some research, and a lot of what he said turned out to be quite disturbingly accurate, and certainly goes against the mainstream around this conversation. I believe what happened to George Floyd was unacceptable, but he has a slightly different take on it. I've checked this video with several friends, and also with Peter, and everyone I have spoken to so far has encouraged me to go ahead and publish. We're still in the negative series of the Simon Poole Show, so we have a long way to go with this journey. I'm just interested to know if this video gets any interesting feedback, which of course you're more than welcome to leave in the comments, and I'll see if I can get Aaron to reply. Many thanks. You've been warned. Excellent, we're recording. Good golly gosh, what a week it's been. What are our thoughts about the issue? And I'm not talking about the invisible enemy now, because that has been supplanted by Black Lives Matter. How do we feel about that? Aaron?
So I think before we kind of like launch into this, let's put some context as to what's happened.
Everyone is aware of the context of what's happened, but carry on. Yes.
No, I don't think everyone's aware of the facts as to what kind of like led to this. I think everyone knows that what the outcome was, which is effectively the fact that people are rioting in the United States at the moment, and all that over because an African American person was actually died allegedly in the hands of the police, right?
It's pretty clear that happened.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
But okay. So, here's my point, though, Simon. Okay. If I ask you and Peter, right? Okay. Why did this happen? As in, why did this person die? Would you be able to tell me that?
He died because a police officer knelt on his neck for 8 minutes and his 3 comrades failed to intervene.
Okay, but did you think that he actually died there because the person was kneeling on his neck?
Those are the facts as far as I understand them, yes. Educate me.
And see, this is my point. So this is kind of like the point that I'm saying is that people think that the reason why this person died was because the police officer was kneeling on his neck, and that's not the case. In fact, he actually died in an ambulance on the way to the hospital. So when the police officer got off his neck, he was still and well and truly alive. Okay.
Right. Sure.
And facts do matter. So effectively, and this is what's really concerning about this is that if that's what people's perspective is the fact that, oh, police officer kneels and suffocates this poor guy to death, right? That's not really the case. The guy died of complications. He had, and if you actually read I think the subsequent coroner's report about it, they actually said that it was a combination of things that he had, like I can't remember exactly what it is, but he had a heart condition, and that's what kind of like caused the cardiac arrest. Now, of course, the fact that someone was actually standing on his neck, did kind of like help aggravate that, but it wasn't
for 8 minutes. I think it did more than aggravate. I think that was clearly a cause of I can't breathe and then died. Maybe he died on the scene. Maybe he died in the ambulance. But
But no, he didn't die on the scene. He actually died in the ambulance. That's a, that's an established fact, right? But the fact of the matter is that it wasn't because of the fact that he was suffocated by the police officer. He died of complications arising from that. And in fairness to actually not just the police officers, to anyone, right? They wouldn't know that that person had a chronic heart condition that would actually be, what do you call that, be aggravated by by
By
what
being suffocated to death.
no, but by what they did, yeah. Like, for instance, if they stood on my neck, I'd probably be fine for 8 minutes. You know what I mean?
But
I wouldn't die.
is that meant to be a common police tactic of standing
Yeah,
on someone's neck when you're
that-
restraining them? It
that,
feels like
yeah.
actually maybe he died, and he died in part because of the actions that that police officer took. I mean, you can get into the specifics of it and try and argue it out, but fundamentally, it's like, why is there a case where a police officer is restraining someone by standing on their neck for 8 minutes?
And I would think anyone listening to this could make their own minds up about this. So I would want to ask Aaron, what's your point?
But my point is the fact that I don't think. I guess a couple of things. I think people are actually reacting to this in such a overtly dramatic way, without actually being in full possession of the facts. So I think that, as I said, the most important thing to note here is the fact that he didn't die because someone was standing on his throat, like what everyone kind of like what the media narrative seems to seems to be. The second part about this is as well is the fact that if that person didn't have a heart condition, he'd probably be still alive today. Okay, so it was effectively a series of unfortunate unfortunate events that would actually that's actually led to this. And then the third part about this as well is the fact that they're going on a riot because of this person's of this person's death, when I guess it doesn't actually even there's no signs that it's actually even potentially racially motivated. Now, let's just juxtapose this, for instance, with the I think it was the LA riots, where that one was actually caused by the fact that they acquitted the police officers that that actually that actually I think did kill an African American person. So this is very different to this because the police officers in question in the Floyd case was actually not only they were fired, but they're also going to be investigated further. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, Peter, go.
I mean, it's a case that I think it's quite easy to see that it isn't just because of the incident that happened and the fact that he died. It's because of all the other things that have built up to that moment, have built up to the fact that a police officer was standing on someone's neck for 8 minutes straight, for then all the previous things that have happened over the past few years in terms of kind of questionable acts of parts of the US police force, which seem to be disproportionately, at least from the media point of view, against African Americans. And that kind of case that it's all this, like the riots aren't happening because of him, they're happening because of a huge history America has with kind of race, to be honest.
Well, absolutely. My impression of American society is that race is a very incendiary point. I don't think, I mean, you're true, Aaron, in the point that we can't look into his heart and see whether or not he was actually considering the ethnic dynamic at play in the situation. But anyone who knows anything about the American context and would look into that situation would see 4 white people committing acts of police brutality against a black individual, and I can't imagine that any American would be oblivious to those facts.
Well, 2 things about that comment. That here's the 2 things. Number one, it's not really police brutality. Like, I mean, they were trying to restrain the guy because the guy was actually resisting arrest, right? And I think judging by what I've read about the accounts of the incident, like the guy was Floyd. The guy was actually quite drunk, and the person, the police officer who was standing on his neck, came on the 3rd squad car. So
Right.
there was 2 squad cars that actually came there before to try and restrain him that actually failed. And then, they needed, I think, a third and fourth to actually come before they actually manage to restrain him. Okay. So that's the first thing. The second thing about it as well is that, there's nothing in there that basically says that, well, that can be proven that it's actually been racially motivated. I mean, who know, if he was white, I'm quite, or Caucasian, I'm sure that, they would restrain, and he acted in the same way. They would probably restrain him in the same way as well.
Well,
So
ifs and buts are all very well, but the facts of the matter was that he was black, and there was clearly, in my view, and in
so
the
so, so
overwhelming view of
yeah, but
commentators, a police brutality.
no, hang on a sec. You're saying ifs and buts, but he happens to be black. But you know what? I can say the exact same thing. Exact same thing in reverse, and say, well, ifs and buts. But if he was white, I'm sure that this will still happen as well. See, the problem that I have is the fact that people rioted about this, and they made a big fuss about this. What they should have done is that they should have actually let the justice system take its due course, right? I mean, as I said, this is very different to the LA race riots, because the LA race riots, at least the reason why people were pissed off and was rioting about that was because of the fact that they acquitted the two, the white police officers that, of the crime, right? This one hasn't even gone into investigation or even in trial. So this is kind of like my problem about this whole issue about what's happening after Floyd.
I would posit to you, Aaron, that what happened was so egregious that we almost don't need a trial in this situation. I can't even believe I'm saying that, because I would always advocate for due justice to happen. But I think the facts of the matter are so evident that I almost have sympathy with rioters, because if that was the way that I felt society could treat me at any moment, then yes, I would probably throw a brick in anger too. I mean, it's an interesting point. I wonder how we stand on the monopoly of violence by the state. Do we agree that the state should have sole monopoly of violence, or are individuals right to kick off when they feel aggrieved?
So go on, Peter.
Peter.
I mean, I think there's an argument that, especially in America, it seems that they, to a certain degree, there's always that implication that as a citizen, you are allowed to kick off.
Well, that's what the country was founded on, wasn't it?
Yeah, and the stuff like the right to bear arms and all that enshrined in the Constitution, but kind of implies that it's down to the citizens at the end of the day to kind of make the choices and fight back when they feel they need to. I mean, obviously that means that you end up in situations like this where, probably honestly due to mismanagement of the situation by those in power, not only now but for years running up to this, have not allowed or have made people in a certain stratosphere of their society feel like they have no voice, and the only way they can resolve something is by going out into the street and protesting, and then somehow that escalates to like full-blown riots, which I think there's a lot of complications in that. I'm sure that's a very nuanced topic in its own right, because how do you go from peaceful protesters to people throwing bricks through windows? There's conspiracy theories and God knows what else going on with that.
Well, exactly. I mean, it may have been a bit of disingenuous actors on the behalf of Antifa, which is a complicated factor in all of this. And the sight of so many white people joining into a black rights issue is either heartening or deeply disturbing, depending on how we feel about that.
Oh, I think that people that actually, all of those Caucasian, I guess, people who joined the Black Lives Matter, who decided to kneel. And I mean, the stupidest thing that I've actually seen, in this week's news clip was Congress paying members of Congress paying a minute silence, or 8 minutes and 49 seconds silence to commemorate, how long the police officer was standing on Floyd, or suffocating Floyd. And a lot of the Democratic Congress men and senators actually decided to kneel in that respect. And I just think that that's ridiculous. I mean, I think that I honestly think that, just to kind of like go back to Peter's point, yes, the Americans are given the right to actually protest, but it's a peaceful protest. let's just turn back our time, our memory, a few decades ago to Martin Luther King. You know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
that was what the protest was about, and they were effectively fighting for the exact same thing, which is African American civil rights. They did it peacefully. We didn't have any of this thing where people were were rioting down the streets, breaking shops, vandalizing things, effectively looting. I don't know if you saw this clip about this person who who jumped into one of the department stores, and then she jumps out and then basically said something like, in front of the camera, and then it was caught by the camera, and she said something like, "Oh, I got myself a lot of good stuff over here." Do you know what I mean? That
I do know what you mean. That I don't understand how throwing a brick through Louis Vuitton's window and helping yourself to handbags actually advances a cause, other than that seems to be the way of things that are going. On the point of Martin Luther King, he said, and I can quote this because I think I agree with it wholeheartedly. I wish to live in a world, or my children to live in a world, where we are judged on the content of our characters, not by the color of our skin. And this is probably where I want to take this conversation. How can you act as an individual when we are so polarized into our partisan groups? I'm thinking of Joe Biden and also Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton blamed women for not voting for her and allowing Donald Trump to become president. And Joe Biden, just before this actually happened, said, if you're black and you don't know who to vote for, you're not black, or words to that effect. That kind of neo-Marxist siloing of people, I think, is quite egregious and encourages groupthink on both sides of the aisle, which any ideology that seeks to divide people rather than unite them, I think, is inherently toxic, which is something that I would question about the concept of a group identity.
So given the fact that I think Peter is probably a little bit more in the left of the left of the political spectrum than I think both of us are, Simon. I'm actually quite keen to actually hear what Peter's thoughts on this is. But all I'm going to point out though is that if you actually look at it, it's always the left that plays identity politics. It's always the left that actually as you can see, Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, both of them from the left. You never hear Trump saying something like, "Oh, because you're white, you need to vote for me," or or whatever it might be. In fact, if you actually look at what Trump does, he actually builds a bridge and reaches out to pretty much anyone who would actually who shares his same ideology. Not long before about a week ago, he had the black students, I believe, from the University of North Carolina or something like that, in the Oval Office. He doesn't he doesn't care what your skin color is or anything like that. He never makes comments about to my knowledge anyway. He never made any comment about that. Whereas Democrats left, right, and center seem to like to pigeonhole people into this. So I guess throwing this, which it's probably a good segue to me throwing this to Peter now. So how do you feel about that, Peter?
I think that probably in the case of Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden, they're seeing it as an easy win, mainly because that kind of identity politics is kind of accepted. Whereas if you were to kind of do the same thing, if you kind of follow the same train of thought and have Trump say the same thing, it would basically be shooting himself in the foot, right? Because if he came out and said something like that, except about white people or men, then the news would have a field day. So of course he wouldn't do it. Whereas it feels like, I mean, Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton are very much of that kind of traditional political class, right? They're playing a game, right? And they know that, or they think by saying something like that they can easily win points, which
and the game is building a coalition that will essentially get you enough votes to become president, and that coalition is easier to get if you can divide people up and put them into voting blocks.
But hang on a sec. So this is kind of like, which leads me to kind of like my next point. And then how can you possibly say that Trump is divisive? How can you possibly run with the argument that Trump is divisive? And also, how can you run with the argument that Trump is sexist, racist, or whatever isms that you can tack onto this?
I mean, there's certain things Trump has done, which means that he is definitely sexist to a degree, And he is divisive because of kind of what his approach to things, which is that naturally, like I think the way he seems to play it is that he can say outrageous things, and he knows that he'll get a decent proportion of people supporting him on the side that he kind of lands on.
Yeah,
And he's
Trump
shown
is.
that he is very flexible in terms of which side he'll go for. Like I think at some point he suddenly decided to be Christian after being a supposedly atheist his entire life. It's one of those situations where I think he just plays a very good game, and he's playing
divisive
in
in the
way.
sense of he is a provocateur. He is
Yes,
a bit of a
exactly.
troll. He knows how to out-meme people by producing arguments that may or may not be spurious in their origins, but get people motivated and keep him in the news cycle.
Yeah.
If his
And-
objective is to win the news cycle every day, he's very good at it, because I don't think there's been a day of his presidency where I haven't heard his name, and
Yeah.
I've lived far away from him the entire time.
And you can tell that by his reaction, what he did in response to Joe Biden saying that, is that he basically created a meme.
Yes.
And it worked. It did what he wanted. He got that all over the news. Everyone knows about him. He'll probably get more votes through doing that than he would ever trying to challenge him on like an equal footing. But that's the thing. He's playing a very different game than those people are. Left or right. I don't really agree with the way that like Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden run their campaigns. I think it's a little bit, I don't know.
It is divisive.
Discriminatory.
It's but it's the way that political system and a lot of political systems end up kind of evolving into, where you have like this solidified political class that play by a certain set of rules and say a certain set of things, because that means that they can beat the other carbon copy on the other side.
Yes.
Until you get a Donald J. Trump, which, like, yeah.
If I may, I think one of the egregious things that I have seen that have come out of all of this is white people kneeling down and bowing towards black people in some sort of cultish way to cleanse themselves of their whiteness. I don't think being white is an inherently bad thing. I think it's an immutable characteristic of a person. And I don't believe that they carry any racial guilt for crimes that were committed several generations before. To try and cleanse themselves is a bit of a
I agree with
move.
That. Is it cleansing themselves, or are they just trying to basically go like, I'm not, like, we're on the same side. It's like an olive branch. I think there are some.
Well,
there's
it went
probably a lot
beyond
of that goes
showing
into
solidarity.
it.
I mean, bowing down. I saw a video of people kissing someone's boots, which is, repugnant.
But are you now just falling for like the media bias on that end of like trying to highlight like
most
some
extreme example?
Yeah, because there's always going to be people who take it a little bit too far. I mean, yeah, that's the human way of
Peter.
things.
I'm very jealous of your point.
So you do know that I don't know if either of you actually paid attention to one of the Democratic presidential debates, and one of the things that one of the I can't remember who it was though. I wish I could, but one of them actually suggested that one of their policies was to actually have pay reparations to African Americans today for the crimes of of their ancestors, or great grandparents or whatever it might be, right? I think that's just ludicrous. Like as Simon kind of like said, it's like what does that have to do with with today's African Americans? Like you know what I mean? They why should the Caucasian and white society pay for that? That's just ridiculous.
Very interesting point, and I think that is something that is actually very difficult for us to understand coming or at least I find it quite difficult to understand coming from like England and the UK, because we haven't had quite the same history that America has, where there have been cases where in the past black people have not been allowed to purchase property outside of a certain area, and there's things that have been put in place historically that have meant that actually there could be an argument that a person of a certain ethnicity in America would be in a much more disadvantaged situation because of things that have happened in the past to kind of push them in that direction.
Yes.
And it's kind of like if you look at the I'm probably going to get myself in trouble by bringing it up, but the kind of Aboriginal situation in Australia, where a series of events have happened, including stealing their children at one point because they were
Yes.
as unfit to look after them, and has caused
Cultural
sorry
degradation, a kind of
Well,
marginalization. See,
yeah
I would disagree with you, Aaron. I think that you could pay reparations. I would, if if I was part of American policy making, which I don't think I would be interested in paying reparations through enhanced funding of education in predominantly black areas, or attaching some kind
yeah
of education premium, so publicly funded schools would receive a boost to help overcome an education gap, a wealth gap, a knowledge gap, an aspiration gap that it
and
clearly exists.
no, my problem with that is that why should I pay for that? I do not want to pay for something that because people felt guilty or was guilted into this. Look, I'm Australian, and I know about the stolen generation and all that. When Australia, one of the things that was really topical in Australia about the Aborigines was the fact that they pressured the government to basically say, or publicly say, I'm sorry to the Aboriginal people, right? Up until we had throughout the time that we had a conservative government, because our conservative prime minister back then, which was John Howard, refused to actually say sorry, because his stance was that he didn't do it. It wasn't his policies that did it. It was, the policy of the government, government back then that did it. So why should he, as today's prime minister, actually say it? Of course, in come a labor prime minister, and of course, one of the first things that he did is he actually apologized publicly for that. I think it was a completely ridiculous thing to do. It was completely wrong. And this is the thing. It's like, why should people today feel sorry, be apologetic about something that they had nothing to do with? No policy, was not involved in the policy making process back then. Why should we actually either apologize for it, or even alternatively be penalized for it?
Because my nation state, I probably take elements of pride in its history. So if I take elements of pride in it, I probably take elements of shame in its history. And to answer your question of why should you pay for it, because you want to live in a collegiate society that doesn't have vast wealth disparities. Otherwise,
So
you end up
sure,
with a
so
brick coming through your window.
no, sure, but by that logic, then we should actually be charging Germany for reparations for World War II. And we all know how that worked out to, in World War One, did we?
Well, okay, well, I mean, interesting point, Aaron. I'll let people make up their minds on that.
There's a law, isn't there, about how long does it take for that to come up in a conversation on the internet?
Something. Reparations. No one said the N word.
But I'm sorry, but the thing is that you're making all of these, you're drawing all of these criticisms about and using this as justification as to why why reparations are fine, when in history it was proven that it's not, and we rejected it before. And in fact, if it wasn't for the fact that we demanded reparations from Germany in World War One, World War Two probably wouldn't have happened.
Right. Well, this has been a very exciting conversation, and has definitely gone places I didn't envision that it would go at the beginning of it. I just want to ask you, Aaron, then, why is Joe Biden surging in the polls? He is, by some polls, 11 points ahead. By most polls, 6 to 10 points ahead. Why is that happening?
Because conservatives have jobs, and we don't answer phone polls because we have jobs.
Interesting. Polls don't matter because we have jobs. What do you think, Peter?
No,
Oh no, sorry, Aaron. Do you wanna?
All I'm saying, the only thing I have to add to that is that Hillary Clinton was surging in the polls as well, and throughout the entire election cycle 4 years ago, and look where she ended up in. And the reason behind this is, and it was really funny because this actually became a topic of conversation after the election. It's like how could the media and the polling system get it wrong? And then effectively one person summed it up really nicely, which is effectively what I just said. And by the way, I stole that quote, but so I can't take credit for that. But yeah, effectively that's what that person said. It's that conservatives have jobs. We don't sit down there and answer phone calls and polling calls because we have a job to go to.
Hillary Clinton did get 2 million more votes than Trump.
From California.
Not where it mattered, which is a big failing on her behalf. I do think that there is a big divide between people when they say, not my president. He is your president and he won the election and he won it with nigh on 50% of the vote, which means that the country is not having a sensible conversation with one another, which I think leads to a calamitous situation that we're seeing at the moment where America seems to be teetering on the edge of some kind of civil war.
The problem, the thing is that it's not the fact that people aren't having. You're right. That people aren't having a conversation with each other, and the issue behind that is because the left just fails to listen. They fail to accept that their ideology is actually flawed, and that and people don't want to their ideology. People don't want higher taxes. People don't want to pay for someone's university degree. People don't want to pay for reparations for something that they didn't actually they didn't commit. So this is the reason why we can't why America's as you said, teetering on the fact that they're going to have a civil war, is because of the fact that the left thinks that they're right and that they can't accept the fact that popularism is actually shifting against them.
Would we be in this situation if Hillary had won?
Probably be worse in some respects, wouldn't it?
More divided.
Yeah, I think there probably would be a bigger degree of animosity than there currently is in certain respects, and maybe a worse one, but who knows? It's quite difficult to tell.
I can tell you right now that if Hillary won, we wouldn't have riots and we wouldn't have this. You know why? Because conservatives will just move on. We moved, like, someone did, once again, I think actually I think this is the same person that I quoted that thing from, but someone did actually say that, when Barack Obama became president, did the conservatives riot? No, we didn't. We accepted it. We just moved on. It's like, that was the people's choice. We lost, and then we just waited 4 years to try and topple him again, and 8 years to replace it. So we never like rioted. We never looted or anything like that. This is what conservatives do.
Because they've got jobs and a stake in society. Perhaps we should address why other people don't have a stake in society.
We have a brain.
Okay, well, I'm going to draw it to a close there. Good golly gosh, what a conversation. I'm glad we're a part of that. I'm sure that we'll only get positive feedback. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Simon.
Thank you, Aaron.
Thanks, Simon.
Okay, goodbye. See you next time.
Bye.